I made a decision years ago. I said, business is cold-blooded, and I can deal with it straight up like that. Or I can go into business and keep my artistic nature. And I decided to go into business and keep my artistic nature. The documents I have, I mean, I'm one of the best photographers in the world. Now, one of the best black, one of the best. And I correct people when they say that. When I grew up, everybody's telling me, oh man, you got it made, all you gotta do is wait for your daddy to die, and blah, 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 and all that bullshit. You know, but the reality of what was going on between me and my dad and the Defender was another thing. And it dawned on me, my legacy is not in the Chicago Defender, it's in having an impact on humanity through a form of the media, and I've been doing that since my early 20s, because that's where I'm known. And my stuff is in every corner of the world, and the Sengstacke name is in books, it's in documentaries, it's all over the place, and that's today what's keeping the Sengstacke alive is what I do. I'm not running a newspaper, but I'm kicking ass all over the world with a form of the media.
Robert Abbott Sengstacke, popularly known as Bobby, has captured life one frame at a time for over 50 years. Bobby's father, John H. Sengstacke, was publisher of the Chicago Daily Defender, the first black daily newspaper in America. Bobby's father's uncle, Robert Sengstacke Abbott, founded the Chicago Defender on May 5th, 1905.
I'm fourth generation in printing and publishing. My great-grandfather was a minister. He started printing a church program. Then he started for other people and wound up creating the Woodville Times. Then my grandfather and Mr. Abbott, who were half brothers, grew up in the printing industry, in the print shop. My grandfather went straight into the ministry. Abbott went to school and studied. The only place you could study printing at that time was Hampton Institute. And he studied printing and became a lawyer. And he was unsuccessful. He tried a little bit in Chicago. Abbott was one of them jet black brothers, almost blue, what they used to call blue black. I only seen two black men in my lifetime who were what the old timers used to call blue black. I haven't seen any in years. People told him, Abbott, you too dark, you too black to win a case in court, because at that time the light-skinned Negro was favored throughout, mainly in the South, New Orleans, all that. Light-skinned Negroes could walk down the side of the street with white people. Black people had to walk down the other side of the street. New Orleans has always had that color cast until recently. So Mr. Abbott told my father one time, I decided to start a newspaper for the suffering masses of my people, and one day I woke up a millionaire, and as long as you serve your people, you'll have something. He started that newspaper with 25 cents and a typewriter in a friend of mine's grandmother's apartment, and typed the paper up, he got it printed, sold it on the street himself. But see, what makes the media great is not the fact that you got media, but what you're talking about.
And what Robert Abbott was talking about on the pages of the Chicago Defender was freedom, justice, and the best way for Negroes in the 1900s to have these rights. The Chicago Defender was illegal below the Mason-Dixon line, but the newspaper gained a national reputation with the help of the railroad's Pullman porters in the South. They made drop-offs in Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, and throughout the South. If they were caught, they were fired, or worse. But in 1917, it is believed that as many as 500,000 people read the newspaper each week, and Mr. Abbott began to campaign for blacks to migrate from the South to the North, and was very successful. He is credited with beginning what history books refer to as the Great Northern Migration. In the late 1930s, Mr. Abbott sent for his nephew, John Henry Sengstacke, Bobby's father, who was living with the family in Savannah, Georgia, his birthplace. After Mr. Abbott's death, John Sengstacke took over the Chicago Defender and continued his uncle's work. For the next 50 years, John Sengstacke and the powerful black press would take on many causes that helped change the course of blacks in America.
My father did a lot of things. He was a lot of different kinds of people, but he never lost the fact that when Mr. Abbott told him this paper is for the people, he told me one time, he said, "Bob, we don't own this newspaper. This paper belongs to the people. God has made this family trustees of this newspaper, and don't you ever forget it." When you're about issues and political control and power, you see what I'm saying? That's what made John Sengstacke significant. That's why he started the daily newspaper. But it was more of a power thing than a money thing. Because people like at API, Don Jackson and Carl Jackson and Don, whatever his name, said your daddy would have been a rich motherfucker if he hadn't started a daily newspaper. But look what he did for black people. See, this is what people don't understand.
Sengstacke did not accept the idea that now that a few black people can be on TV or write columns for white-owned newspapers, that the black publication should go out of business. So instead of folding, he established a daily edition of the Chicago Defender.
1956.
That's right. They said, look, we don't have to go out of business, let's compete with the white newspapers.
Bobby worked at the Chicago Defender from the age of 7. He even published one of the family's newspapers in Memphis for several years. We'll get to that later. But Bobby's contribution to the Sengstacke legacy was destined to be through his visual art skills, his photography.
When I first started photography, I was rebelling. I was Sengstacke crazy, running around in the camera driving a Volkswagen. He'd be driving, going down with his daddy and drive a Cadillac. And that just made me delve more into what I was doing. It was somewhat of a rebellion before I knew how much of a love of my art. Some years later, "Bobby, what are you doing?" "Don't stop taking those pictures." I didn't get into photography to make money, but it's an expensive medium. And even today, 50 years later, there's a ton of things I need. So I started taking the money. And before I knew it, I was doing photojournalism for the Defender. And there were other photographers there at the time, but periodically my stuff wound up on the front page. And my photojournalism grew because I was good at it. I knew what a picture page was. The only thing that was totally creative except you have an audience. Where else can a black photographer gel speaking to his people? It's the only black daily newspaper in the country. And the front page is a performing arts stage.
Bobby's audience grew in Chicago and expanded through the 1960s and 70s. Sengstacke newspapers acquired several other black newspapers, including publications in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Memphis, and his photographs were published all across the country. After the assassination of Dr. King, Bobby's photographs of him became some of his most admired works.
The reason my work of Dr. Martin Luther King is so outstanding, not for me, but I've had too many photo editors and photo researchers say the same thing over and over again. Your work seems to have captured the essence of Dr. Martin Luther King's character and personality, and that's what I've done. The reason I did that was because the photographs in the white press at that time, because see, nonviolence was had only been done on the world by Gandhi, and They made him look like a turn-the-other-cheek simpleton. You know, I always think about this picture he had looking like a dummy with his hands out. And I didn't like the imagery that the white media was portraying of Dr. King. And so I didn't go all overboard to go to every march or to go to every event and follow him around. I believed in the nonviolent movement, and I supported it, but I wasn't a nonviolent person. But I had the greatest degree of admiration. I didn't look at those people as weak. You'd be pulling in bus stations, getting their ass kicked, getting spit on, peed on and shit, and sit there and do nothing. I admired them more than I admired the fact that I couldn't do that. I also knew early on that he was a charismatic person who was being played down. He's one of the greatest orators. So I set out to capture what was not being portrayed of him, and now all those flaky ass pictures of Martin Luther King are gone. Mine will be here forever.
Bobby documented the life of black people in the 1960s and 70s with a passion. He became the official photographer for Mohammed Speaks newspaper, the national publication of the Nation of Islam. And as with his civil rights portfolio, his purpose was to capture the true essence and beauty of black people. Bobby traveled throughout the country like a prophet on a mission, photographing and documenting a time in American history. His purpose was always the same, to show the beauty of all life through his camera lens and through the Sengstacke Eye.
A.B. Spellman invited me down to do an exhibition at a writers' conference. So I came, I exhibited, I heard all the accolades and I left. Invited me back in 1969. And I did another exhibit. And he said, Bobby, you know why you've been invited down here to a writers' conference as a photographer twice? And I said, no, A.B., I never really thought about it, you know. He said, because your photos are like short stories. And that affirmed something I was trying to do, because I knew that on the front page of the Defender, I'm in a newspaper with one image. You had television, you had radio, you had magazines. What is going to inspire people? I had to have a quality to excite the imagination and let the mind of the viewer fulfill the story. But I was creating a movie, a mental movie with a still image. Sometimes those stills would create individual stories in every mind. Sometimes them stills had the same story, but it always excited the imagination. And so when A.B. told me that, it made me feel good to let me know I was achieving what I set out to do.